Hello YouTube, I'm back again with another deck profile. I'm actually going to be doing my branded Despia Bystial build. You'll notice I'm playing more than 40 cards, but I'm going to explain the reason why between the ratios and maybe possibly one of the one-ofs that you might see on the screen. But I'm just going to go in depth of the card choices. And when I play this deck, if you've seen one of my duels, it's still very good with even with how I edited the profile and the cartridges I made right now. So let us continue. Obviously, we're gonna start off. We have one Albion, the Shrouded Dragon. It is a card that you actually have to main as a one of, simply because it actually helps unbrick your hands, just in case, like, yeah. So it can be from your hand or deck. So basically, what happens if if you send you most likely going to send either branded opening or branded retribution. You send one of those cards from your deck to the graveyard. That's usually what you want to happen. You place this card in the bottom of the deck and you draw one card. Simple as that. Obviously, we're maxing out on our starter card. We're going to be playing 3 Aluber. He's the important card that you want to open in your hand, simply because it's obvious when he's normal supposed somebody add a brand spell, drop and protect your hand. The last effect doesn't come up too often, but it will happen regardless. But usually it's very easy how to summon this card. But I'm talking about you're not going to really use the last effect to negate the opponent's monster effect. So what happens is that if you face a fusion monster you control short by battle or leaves the field by it because of an opponent's card effect, while this card's in your graveyard, you target one effect monster your opponent controls, special summon it, this card, and if you do, the target's monster's effects are negated. Instead of playing 2, we're playing just 1 card easier because we have ways of retrieving it as well as adding it or special summoning from our deck. So I think 1 is appropriate because you want to have more card choices. You don't want to open with too many Cartesias, although it is great to fusion summon multiple times. So basically what she does, obviously you're aware, is that if you have Fallen Albas in your graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand, and quick effect during the main phase, fusion summon 1 level later higher fusion monster from your extra deck using fusion material monster from your hand or field. And during the end phase, obviously, is when if a fusion monster was sent to your graveyard this turn, added to your hand during the end phase. And we're going to be playing a one-ofs for our Bystials. Playing 1 Bystial Baldric. I feel like the reason why it's best to play them is one-ofs, because you have ways of summoning them more often. So that just because since they are sorry about that. Since they all have hard ones per turns, you want to be able to bring about your opponent by killing them by 1 of each Bystial monster that you have in hand. So, and yeah, they can be very bricky, so it's better to have 1 of them just so if they negate the Magnuma or they make it negate Baldric, whatever, you summon the other one. So the last effect might not come up as often, but I do think it can be very useful in situations, because what happens if this is a quick effect either way, but if your opponent controls a monster, obviously you special summon it. They all have the same effect. Target 1 light or dark monster in either graveyard, bench or special summon this card. But if your opponent controls a monster, special summon anytime you want. So, and if your opponent special summons, let me read this effect. Give me a moment. If your opponent special summons a Ritual Fusion Synchro Exceed and or Link monster, except during damage, you contribute 1 other light or dark monster, then target 1 of those special summon monsters and banish. That in itself can be very handy in case you want to get rid of their blowout cards. It may not be that easy, but it's just to slow them down even further. Same for Jerusalem. Like I said, though, you just simply play them as one-ofs because you want to have ways to push your opponent, and you want to be able to summon at least 1 of each, and then you have ways of just being able to reoccur their effects. So if the other one gets negated, you can match some other one if you have 2 in hand or 3 or more, who knows. But yeah, as effect may not be the best, but Jerusalem, regardless if it's sent from the field to the graveyard, target one special summon monster opponent controls sent to the graveyard. Magnamut, I'd say, has the best effect out of all of them, out of all the Bystials that I know, besides Serenir, but because of the fact, not only ignoring the first effect, you can act when it's summoned, you can activate this effect. Because during the end phase, when you add one dragon monster besides itself from your deck or give your 10, and it's either another Bystial or a dragon that you're always going to have access to. So sometimes playing three can be the best option. But in itself, it is a slow effect. So we got to try to find ways and other reasons to try to achieve Bystial monsters besides using Magnum's effect in case it doesn't resolve. Serenir is very important. You can also try to bump two, or you just play this instead. But I feel comfortable playing one of each Bystial because it allows me to have more options. But this is important because it can either send your Lubellion, which I'm only playing one of, or a brand spell trap from your deck to the graveyard. So only when it's sent to the graveyard, whether it's from the hand, field, or deck, doesn't matter. So obviously we're going into one strategy since I did cut the ad libitum. I just find it a brick because like it's only good unless you draw to a fusion card. But this, in its own respect, tragedy is very useful because if it's sent to the graveyard by a card effect, or if it's banished, add one Despia monster from your deck to your hand besides itself. And if it's engraved, you can banish it to set one of your brand spell trap cards from your graveyard to your field. So in itself, just allowing you to has just all two really good effects, being able to get access to your resource a lot more easier. And basically, it's something that you must play if you're playing branded all the time. So there's no exception. You gotta at least have at least one copy. The thing is, the first effect is situational because you have to find it has to be discarded by a card effect or banished. So you just can't just simply single-handedly discard a card during your end phase if you have more cards in hand, or in its respect, so it has to be discarded basically, or has to be removed by a card effect specifically. So, but it's also depending on the rules. If you read the rules carefully, then you'll see otherwise. So. Obviously, we're maxing at 3 all now because no need much to explain. I don't see the. I think it's not a good idea to drop it to 2 because I feel like it's the only way you can activate Branded Fusion. Even considering, yes, you have ways of shuffling back to the deck with Lubellion, but this is so that you can be able to resolve your Branded Fusion. And we're all aware what its ability is, basically super polymerization on legs, but the only negative downside is that like it has to be with the specific materials and the opponent can respond to its effect regardless. So but unless you have a card that says otherwise, then Fallen Abyss is definitely is going to be even more powerful. So we're playing 3 Magician Souls since we're playing 1 Dark Magician, but since I should already mentioned that we have ways of shuffling Dark Magician back deck, there's no reason to play the Chaos Illusionist or whatever, or Illusion Magician, whatever. So, but this helps you, like I said, that's why we're playing more cards, we're playing more spell trap cards, allowing us to draw even further into our key pieces, giving us more resources, baiting out hand traps like Ash Blossom, and rightfully so, because I feel like if they Asher Branded Fusion, I feel like the deck is possibly dead and has no ways of getting access to and giving you more options because you need to solidify yourself by playing other cards. Like if so, you need to bait hand traps so that if for whatever reason, if you have another fusion spell, like just to let you know, Brand Fusion is once per turn. It's a hard once per turn. So it's like if they ash that, if it's negated, you need to find ways to give yourself more options to make a comeback, whether it's by fusion something or something that's really strong. And our one I was obviously playing Sprint's Kid, not much to need to say. I do think it's important because we have ways of searching it. But if this card is it has a set, the first effect is similar to Cartesia. I'm not going to really explain that. So, but if this card is normal special summon, you can add it to hand one of your brand spell trap cards. So anywhere basically, as long as it's face up from your banish zone. And then what happens that if you do, you got to place one card from hand on the bottom of the deck. But it's important because just being able to retrieve your branded spells, especially if they're in the graveyard or a bench, and if you have no way of access. This card otherwise lets you get access to them if it's somewhere else besides your main deck. So that's the reason why we're playing it, because you need to find other ways of retrieving those cards. So the one Lubellion, the reason we're just playing the one Lubellion, because it can be a break if you're playing more than one copy. But on top of that, especially with how the format has changed, people have decided to drop the ratios. I'd rather just see one copy, to be honest, because you're mainly using it to set up your branded beast. That's all there is to it. Search at least one of your pistols, and they can be very bricky because if there's no dark, or if they have a card that banishes monsters from the graveyard, then there's Lubellion doesn't serve its purpose. So you better rather just see one copy. And if you, like I said, if you have ways of searching it, it's better just to play one of Lubellion and play the cards that have you have access to it, which you're going to see afterwards. So because it's going to be further and further into the deck list once you see the card, and I'm sure you're already aware what I'm playing. So other than that, we're playing Tumor Carrier in itself is very important. Not only does its effect has a quick effect, while it controls a fusion monster that mentions Fallen Abyss, negating any monster effect. But on top of that, this effect is important because if this card is banished, regardless of card effect, or like either way, it doesn't have to be by a card effect. If it's just banished, you can add from your deck one Fallen Abyss or one monster that mentions it. So in itself, it's proven to be more useful, and then because of the extra deck that we're using, you want to have ways of getting to specific fusion monsters as well as getting that easy search. Like, the search in itself may not sound easy, but the banishing part is where the Bystials come in, as well as your other plays like you're going to see after. And obviously just the one Dark Magician because we're playing Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. And the card that makes Mercarrier viable, obviously, besides the Bystials, we're playing 3 Allure Darkness. It's not once per turn. Draw 2, and you're most likely, if you're going to use this card, either going to banish Tragedy or Mercarrier, or the Fallen Abyss in hand, because it's based heavily a brick if you're going first. So, but being able to draw 2 cards and not being once per in itself makes the card officially useful. So, playing 3 Band Fusion just to go into Fusion Summon a lot more often, and allowing us to use our extra deck just makes the card, gives you a reason to bump the deck even more. So, Branded Red, we're just playing at 1 now, but since the hard once per turn, just gives you another option to Fusion Summon and just help break your opponent's board, but just makes the deck viable in a way to the point where that you can't heavily rely on Branded Fusion. So, another Fusion card, branded in white. Sorry about my screen. This one wasn't seeing play back in the day, but now people are starting to, because of the number of Fallen of Albaz fusion monsters. Sorry about that. Shit. Give me a moment. Sorry I did that, but you guys, give me a moment. Let me go back. Let me add to my deck again. So you should already be aware. It wasn't seeing play back in the day because people thought it was a brick, but people started to realize how useful it is because they knew the amount of fusion material monsters that Brandon White has. I mean, the extra deck has that you can fusion someone with using Brandon White. But again, this is a card that can come in clutch just in case, like if you draw into it and your opponent has a monster, you fusion someone of your any of your fusion monsters, as long as it mentions, like, it doesn't have to mention Fallen, as long as you use Fallen Abyss, you can. That's when you are able to banish from your graveyard. That's all I got to mention. So, Branded lost because so that you can be able to search your Fallen Abyss or cards that mention monsters that mention it, and it continues to only need one hits off since it's a hard once per turn. Ash can negate it, apparently. I didn't realize, but because of the ruling and stuff, so I gotta respect that. But this is heavily important because you have ways of setting it up. You either using Bystial Rebellion or with your other monsters that search brand spell traps. 3 brand opening because you want to see a Luber as much as possible. And on top of that, if it's in your graveyard, if a fusion monster would be destroyed by a card effect, you banish it from your graveyard, and it is once per, both of them are once per turn. So, and it does lock you into fusion monsters. So, So the tech card that I'm actually going to bring up is 3 Chaos Space. Although we're playing 1 Lubellion, I feel like this is very good in its own right. Is potentially better, my opinion, because what happens that, like, even if you only have one target in your deck, is you can still just shuffle back to your if you could decide to bench Lubellion, that can help, or it could be any of your light dark fusion material monsters. So you're aware of how it works. Send one light or dark monster from your hand to the graveyard. Add one light or dark monster that cannot be normal summoned set from your deck to hand with a level from 4 to 8. Since most of the majority of monsters are dark and Lubellion's a light level 8, that in itself, in its own right, is basically makes the card heavily useful, heavily important, and in its own right, a reason to actually giving it a spot in the main deck. So. And you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one of your banished light dark monsters that cannot be normal summoned set. That includes extra deck monsters. It gets placed on the bottom of the deck, then you draw one card. So that's why we have souls, just in case, or we discard a lot of our cards, and then essentially drawing a one card just in case as well, on top of having a lure. So obviously a mandatory card playing Fusion Deployment to bait the hand traps. You're using this mainly to go into Cartesia, but a lot of times if we're going second, you're probably going to go into Fallen of Albaz to special summon it from your deck, and then fusion some of your opponent monsters unless they match the materials for a specific fusion monster. Same goes for Super Polymerization. It is a quick effect, they cannot respond, but this can help you push for game, and I just feel like too many boards are like heavily unfair, so you gotta find ways to try to break them as much as possible. And our Lubellion target that we usually set up for the combo is Branded Beast. The first effect is important during the main phase. Once per turn, target one dragon monster while you control Bystial monster. You tribute the dragon monster, target one card your opponent controls, destroy it. And during the end phase, you don't see it too often, but during the end phase, you can target one brand, continue spell trap in your graveyard, place it face up on your field. So I'm just surprised it doesn't say except Branded Beast. Maybe since because even though it is once per turn, um, and you're attributing monster for a cost, in its own right is a reason why it shouldn't be a problem to set another Branded Beast. So obviously we're playing one Branded Retribution. Usually you don't want to draw into this in case you have cards that can send it to from the hand to the graveyard, but usually doing this to retrieve one of your branded spell trap cards, and which will really help because that way you can retaliate against the opponent, and that you can push yourself further for game. Like I said before, I'm not going to really mention too much about the side deck because I feel like it is optimal. It's up to personal preference, but I'm just going to mention a few cards. Instead of main decking, we're just siding Ra's Disciple as well as the Brand Expulsion. People are mentioning the gimmick Nightmare, whatever his name is. I'm not going to give too much detail, but like this is because yeah, people are aware of Ra's Disciple. So if you draw into the Disciples and Expulsion, it doesn't really help you when you go in the first game in game one. So it can all be pretty situational. So it's like you don't rather side it unless you go first, or like as long as you know where your opponent might possibly side. You gotta be able to think logically. So you gotta be aware of you gotta be aware that your opponent isn't sure that what you're thinking. So you gotta be able to play outside the box and try to confuse them a bit to the point where it's not always guaranteed you can place raw stuff. If anything, it's to make them nervous and make them assume that you are gonna side it. But in a lot of cases, it's not always the most useful. So you gotta pick which cards in the side deck is the best for depending on the matchup. So Ra's Disciple isn't always going to come up, so it's like you also gotta have another alternative option. If it doesn't show up, then you always gotta make sure to cover that strategy for something else and try to be able to think of a way to unbrick your hand and be able to have like more ways to make sure that you don't end up coughing yourself the game or choking during that duel. And we're just, like I said, just gonna go straight to the extra deck. Playing 2 Albion is no exceptions. This card itself is very important, just allowing you to set a branded spell trap during the end phase. Can come in very handy, especially if you have trap cards. But the first effect is important because it can not only can this card in itself in its own right attack, but you can fusion summon one level 8 or high or lower fusion monster from your extra deck, except Albion the Brand Dragon, by banishing fusion materials on it from your hand, field, and or graveyard. So it gives you multiple ways of attacking with just more than one monster, and then giving you the way of trying to basically push the opponent even further, in that you can have more access to other cards besides Albion. So that in its own right why you play 2, because it gives you access to several different cards, and you don't really see it being too situational. So it's like you want to be able to see it more often or not. So Despian Quiritis obviously is a card that you play 1 of, and you have ways of reshuffling it, which is why we use Chaos Space. So, but either way, you already know how the card works during the main phase. Quick effect: change the attack of all monsters on the field, except change all of their attack points, their current attack points, to 0 until the end of this turn, except level 8 higher fusion monsters. And if this card were to leave the field because of an opponent's card effect, except by battle, you special summon 1 Fallen Albaz or 1 Despia monster from your deck. So in its own right, it just absolutely has 2 amazing effects in its own right, because like not only does it push for game, it lets you summon from the deck, and then you get even more consistency. We're just going for 1 Garura as our super poly target. Not only does it deal even heavily amount of damage, but if it's sent to the graveyard, you draw 1 card. 1 Dusk Dragon. Obviously, it specifically requires Blazing Cartesia, but it's gonna reoccur on Grave. But this is important because it can let you set up your Albion play as well as Bystial Lubellion, so you have to at least have 1 copy. But the important part is that even though you're not going to see it too often, but you could banish this card from the field or graveyard, special summon 1 Dogmatica monster from your deck or 1 Despia monster from your deck. It would be nice to have more Despia targets, but because our extra deck is so tight, we gotta make sure we have space for like more exponential and viable fusion monsters that can actually be able to compete with the meta. So that's one thing you got to think about. So Garden Chimera, even though we're not playing polymerization, but in its own right, when it's fusion summoned, because what happens is that it requires at least 3 monsters with different names, 1 from either hand or field, and 2 monsters from either hand or field. But what happens depending on how you fusion summon this card, give me a moment. You can destroy a card up to the number of cards you fused from the field, or you draw 1 card up to the number of cards you fused from your hand. But since what makes this card very useful is that, since we're not playing polymerization, you're mainly using it for branded red, obviously, because it comes out as a quick effect. Basically, Carmen basically is quick if you play with branded red, but unfortunately we're not playing polymerization because targeting doesn't have to happen as often. But polymerization in itself is a brick, but if you do have polymerization in your graveyard, it makes it more difficult for your opponent to actually target this card. So unless they try to get rid of polymerization, yes, that's the only way they can actually try to target Chimera. So 1 Lubellion, back then people used to play it at 2, but it's 1 because the deck in itself is very tight, but the effect isn't in itself too much, but usually you're going to shuffle it back into the extra deck to go into one of your more valuable fusion monsters, and you reuse it then possibly your next turn. But being able to retrieve your resources in itself is very important and deserves its spot in the extra deck. So not much to explain, but they're either going to go into Mirror Jade or Red Eyes Dragoon, whatever makes you feel comfortable. So, Masquerade, we originally were playing this too, but because there's new support for branded, we have to make space for other cards. So, but and then again, what happens? This card, if you're playing two, it is very scary carded. The card in itself is just outright like abusable because if you already, it's not once per turn, and if you have at least two copies, it doesn't say you can only control one copy, but the fact you can actually play two copies in itself, you're basically making your opponent, you're forcing your opponent to pay 1,200 life points to activate any of their cards or effects. Besides that, it doesn't get the effect after once if your opponent controls a fusion or basically any extra deck monster, or besides the extra deck, if they control ritual fusion, synchro, Xyz, or link monster while this card's in your graveyard, special summon this card from your graveyard, but banish it when it leaves field. 2 Mirror Jade in case you, this is in itself, is in its right, is important. But like what happens that you're gonna replace the, you can also replace the other Mirror Jade, the other one that you have an extra, but like it's to make the loop come alive, because a lot of times you can only control one copy, but what happens that once per turn you send one fusion monster from your extra deck that mentions Fallen Nabas, and you banish one monster on the field. Also, you can activate on the next turn. It is a quick effect either way. So, but either way, if this card were to leave the field because of an opponent's card, you can destroy all monsters your opponent controls during the end phase of this turn. So, and possibly this is just a fusion super poly target. We're going to Mud Dragon, although I don't find this effect the most useful. It is in case of certain matchups, but just allowing you to easily get rid of your opponent's monsters without them responding in its own respect is why you have to place Mud Dragon Assault, because you have to be aware of the matchups that you're up against, because they can cause you sorts of problems where you can't even be able to play your deck. So you want to be able to get around those cards, and Mud Dragon is one of them, especially if you're playing Super Poly. So, and Predator Plan Draco Stepalea is one of those cards that just, yeah, it is mandatory in next deck, just easy to summon. On top of that, just being able to has a quick effect. You give it a predator counter, and once you do, their effects are negated, can't activate it. Although you can play multiple copies, but the one itself is enough because you deliberately want to give yourself more options to punish your opponent. And one of them is Dread Eyes Dark June. Even though we're playing the one brick of Dark Magician, either way, it helps against Kashtira, just being able to blow up a monster and dealing them damage equal to attack, as well as this card cannot be targeted by card effects or be destroyed by them. And the best part is that if they were to activate a card effect, you can use Rise Dark Dragoon's effect, discard one card, negate the activation, and if that card is destroyed by its effect, it permanently gains 1,000 attack. And for our next card, we're going to Rinbrum the Striking Dragon. This card is one of the reasons why we're playing more of the Fallen Albaz cards and cutting down on the Bystials, because now we have more ulterior options, because this in a way gives us more fusion monsters that can actually push the opponent. And I feel like that's what Branded was actually lacking. There wasn't enough fusion material monsters, there wasn't enough fusion monsters that could actually help against the opponent. I mean, help push the opponent and oppress them even further. But this card in itself isn't an Omnigate, but it's a disruption. So basically what happens, if your opponent activate a fusion, synchro, or Xyz, or link monster effect, you can negate that effect. On top of that, you return one monster from the field to the hand. So what I mean, it's not a Omni negate, is because like the opponent can still use spell traps, so they can respond with Dark Ruler. Obviously, Dark Ruler is one because you can never respond to with monster effects, but they have ways of like stopping this card. The card itself, because people don't like negates because they feel like if you go first and you open up with 2 negates, then yeah, then that's when the player decides to quit, especially if they have no ways of countering those cards, or in trying to push their way into giving themselves the chance to actually, even if you're ever actually playing Yu-Gi-Oh! So to be able to actually get to the point where they actually do something, because like, I scoop after, but it's like this card seems like it, but it's like that's only if they decide to activate a fusion, sync, or exceed or link monster. But it does not apply to main deck monsters, so they can try to find a way of getting rid of this card. But during the opponent's turn as well, this card's in your graveyard, you could target one Fallen Abyss, or in your graveyard, you could target one Fallen Abyss in your graveyard, special summon either that monster or this card, and banish the other. So you can either banish Rinbrom to special summon Fallen Abyss, or you can banish Fallen Abyss, special summon Rinbrom. But that's all much to say. And another super power target is our last fusion monster, starting Venom Fusion Drake. Now you don't see many players using this card, but in its own right can be useful for if you want to just outright, like I said, I'm more of a board breaker. I like to play with a bunch of powerhouses in my deck, so I don't have any issue with cards that gain a lot of attack, even if they don't do as much compared to the other card, or press the opponent by simply like torturing them slowly and just using negates and like ensuring that they lose by taking away all their options. So, and that's what people don't like about Omni Negate, so this one's not one of them. But so if this card is fusion summon, makes card gain attack equal to one monster's special summon monster, you can make this. So basically, let me repeat that. If this card is fusion summon, you make this card gain attack equal to one opponent's special summon monster on the field. It does not target. You're not affecting the monster. You decide yourself. If anything, it's only affecting starring Venom rather than the monsters, because you're deciding for yourself. Once per turn, you can target one level 5 or a monster. You're not going to use this effect too often, but unless they do have something useful that's level 5 or higher, it becomes that monster's original name, as well as this card's effect is replaced with that monster's original effect. And last but not least, kind of similar to Mirror Jade, but it's a lot quicker. But if this fusion summon card is destroyed, you may not see this effect too often, but you can destroy all of your opponent's special summon monsters. So besides destroying all monsters, just destroying the ones that your opponent has special summoned. And that should be it for the video. I've been talking way too much. This is probably going to be my longest videos, but either way, hope you guys enjoyed the deck profile. I gave you some new ideas to help you innovate your deck building and make you have fun as well when you decide to get into playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Whether it's competitively at locals or you just want to do casual, but either way, it's for you to decide. This is just a brief update and an explanation how I provide this list. And if whether you want to make some changes at all depends on you, but I feel comfortable with this because of my experience. But either way, hope you guys enjoy the video. Be sure to check for more upcoming content later in the future. Be sure to check your notifications. Comment, like, subscribe. Thank you.